Hello everybody, welcome to English with Mrs. Craven on Thursday the 4th of February 2021. I hope you're all well. Today we are learning to write a narrative using a story map. And our success criteria is, can you write a story using your story map? Can you include a start, a middle, and an ending in your story? And can you sequence your sentences to create a narrative, to create a story that makes sense? Now, yesterday we looked at the page where the boys, Etho and Bert, were pretending to be pirates. They were also pretending to be kings, soldiers, and astronauts. And you imagined that you were going on an adventure as one of those characters, and you drew your own story map to plan your new story as either a king, a soldier, or an astronaut. Now, I want you to look at your story map that you planned yesterday and retell your story in your own words in full sentences to remind you what you planned to happen at the beginning, the middle, and the end of your new story. What did you plan to happen? Open your books from yesterday, have a look. What did your drawing plan, your story plan, show you was going to happen? What were your ideas? Discuss them now. Now, I want you to use your story map from yesterday, your plan, and turn it into a written story. Now, this must include a start, a beginning, a middle, and an ending. And you must sequence your sentences to form a story that makes sense. And try and use some storybook language. I've highlighted that in red on my PowerPoint to remind you, because that could be a way that you could fly high today. Now, I've given you an example on my PowerPoint, and my example was that I have found a story map that I've shown you on my screen of a boy who pretended to be an astronaut. So I chose the astronaut character. And here is a little story map of what the astronaut or the boy got up to as an astronaut character. So from my map, I can remind myself that he went outside at the beginning and found an aeroplane, and he flew higher and higher until the aeroplane began to break down, and it broke down on the moon where the boy got stuck. But luckily, an alien came along in a spacecraft, and the boy was worried that he would be a monster alien, but he wasn't. He was friendly, and luckily he said that he would help the boy astronaut to get home safely, seeing as his plane was broken. And he drew him a map of how to get home, and he helped him make a parachute. So the boy astronaut had to leave his plane on the moon, but he got a parachute and he safely sailed back down to Earth and landed on his favourite armchair in time for tea. The end. So I've retold my story of the little boy who pretended to be an astronaut in words to remind me what I planned. And you did that earlier on the previous slide. But now I'm going to use my story map and turn those ideas into full sentences. And I'm going to try and use some story language as well to fly high. So here's what I had to go at writing, and it's on my screen, but I'll read it out loud to you. Once upon a time, there was a little boy who dreamed of being an astronaut. One night he found a plane and he tried to fly to the moon, but his plane broke down. All of a sudden, he spotted a green alien in a spaceship. The alien and the astronaut boy became friends, and the alien drew the astronaut boy a map to show him how to fly back home to Earth with a parachute. He landed safely on his armchair and lived happily ever after. Now, you can pause it here and reread that part again of my story with your grown up and think about how I wrote my story with a beginning, a middle, and an ending. And also see if you can find the storybook language that I used. I did highlight it in red so it's easy to find, but there's other story language that you can include as well, some that you might have heard in storybooks, or you can borrow mine if you'd like to. Now, if you're thinking, oh, that's a lot for my child to achieve, please don't worry. Ways to support your child at home with their writing is to help them sound out words. You can use the phonics sound map, which I've included on the next slide to help your child to sound out their words, and that's useful for everybody. Or you can ask your child to tell you their story verbally, making sure that they've given you some story language, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they're using the ideas from their story map from yesterday, and you can write the story for your child. But it's very important that the ideas, the language, and the sequencing come from your child, making sure they understand the idea of a story having a beginning, a middle, and an ending, and using the idea that they came up with yesterday. Here is the sound mat. So if it's useful to have this slide up whilst you're doing the work with your child, then that might be a top tip. And they can sound out any words they might need help with. Remember, Fred Fingers and Fred Talk is always a good idea. So if you were sounding out a word, let's just think of a simple word. Let's think of dog. So you could say to your child, let's sound that out with Fred Talk on Fred Fingers. So Fred Fingers, as we hold up our fingers, we think of the first, oh, where have my fingers gone? There we go. We say, oh, what sounds can we hear in dog? And we say d, o, g. There are three sounds, dog. Oh, d, o, g, dog. And then we say, can we find those sounds on our sound map? What was the first sound? Oh, remember it was d. And we look for it, we write it down. The next sound was o. We look for it, we write it down. And the third sound was g. We look for it, we write it down. So that is there as a support tool to help everybody. Now, let's reflect. We were learning to write a narrative using a story map. So were we successful? If we could write some of our story, we were successful. If you could include a start, a middle, and an ending in your story, well done. If you could sequence your sentences in that order to create a narrative, to create a story, well done. And if you could use some story language in there, excellent. Remember, some children will have written this down themselves, and that's super. But if your child was able to tell you a story in their own words with a beginning, a middle, and ending that made sense and followed on the ideas from their story map, but you wrote it, that's okay too, because the idea was that they could tell a narrative, so they have been successful as well. And if your child just wrote the start of the story and then you wrote the middle, and the end, that's fine as well. However suits you, That's okay. So if you achieved any of that, you've been super successful today. Well done. We are really, really proud of you. Well done, children, and well done, grown-ups. Now, to fly high even more, can you reread your story out loud to check it makes sense, or ask a grown-up to read it to you and make sure it makes sense? If you're at home and you're feeling very technological, you could send in a video of you reading your story out loud to parentssupport@shepherdswell.emat.uk. And remember, everyone, you're amazing just the way you are. Well done. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye, everybody.